Jesus' trial before Annas and Peter's denial. John chapter 18 verses 12 to 27, NKJV. 1. Jesus arrested and taken to Annas, 12:18, CV 12. 12 Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. Jesus was arrested on Thursday and crucified on Friday. Jesus could have 12 legions of angels to protect him. Matthew chapter 26 verse 53. But he was voluntarily arrested. John chapter 10 verse 18. He was unfortunate and mistreated so that we might be fortunate and well treated. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 9. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 5-6. Joseph's brothers were jealous and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Joseph ended up a slave of an Egyptian and then a prisoner. Joseph was mistreated and unfortunate. But God enabled him to interpret the dream of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The interpretation of the dream enabled them to prepare well for the coming famine. Pharaoh entrusted Joseph to manage the whole country. Joseph rescued his brothers during the famine. But the brothers were afraid of Joseph in fear that he might punish them. But Joseph said in Genesis chapter 50 verse 19-21 NLT, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children." Joseph is a shadow of Jesus Christ. They mistreated Jesus, but God intended it all for good. God made Jesus the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Philippians chapter 2 verse 9-11. Revelation chapter 19 verse 16. To save the lives of many people. CV 13:14. 13 And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas who was high priest that year. 14 Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Annas was a former high priest who was replaced by Caiaphas under a new Roman governor. However, Annas remained a significant figure in Jewish leadership. The event related to V14 happened in John chapter 11 verse 50 NKJV. See the message on John chapter 11 verse 49-57. CV 15:16. 15 And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. 16 But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and brought Peter in. Another disciple, in V15 is maybe John, the author of this book. He was known to the high priest. 15. He took Peter into the courtyard of the high priest. 16. CV 17:18. 17 Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." 18 Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. As Jesus foretold, John chapter 13 verse 38, Peter disowned Jesus. 17. Peter stood and warmed himself near a fire, together with the servants and officers of the high priest. 18. 2. Jesus' trial before Annas, 1924, CV 1924. 19 The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. 20 Jesus answered him, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing." 21 Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed they know what I said. 22 And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" 23 Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me?" 24 Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Annas asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. 19. Regarding his doctrine, Jesus said in John chapter 7, 16-18 NKJV. See the message on John chapter 7 verse 15-24. 16 Jesus answered them and said, "My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me." 17 If anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine. whether it is from God or whether I speak on my own authority. 18 He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. The doctrine of Jesus is not from his own authority but from God who sent him. This fact can be verified if anyone wills to do his will. Jesus does not seek his own glory but the glory of the one who sent him. He is true and righteous. When we will to do the will of God who sent Jesus, God will be glorified. Therefore, we shall know that his doctrine is from God. What Jesus taught is God's revelation and the truth. The only problem is the unbelief of Annas. Even if Jesus repeats it before Annas, it will waste his time. So, Jesus asked him to refer to those who have heard him what he said to them. 21. They heard, believed and therefore knew what he said. 21. When Jesus said v 20:21, one of the officers struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" 22. This officer must be spiritually blind and dead. He didn't know the real problem of their conversation. Annas' rejection to acknowledge the revelation of God, or the truth, Jesus spoke. To people like this officer, Jesus must seem like a criminal, guilty and a wrongdoer. To such people, Jesus said in John chapter 7 verse 24 NKJV, "Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." There are many people like this. People scorned Jesus when he was on the cross, Matthew chapter 27 verses 40, 42-44, Mark chapter 15 verse 30-32, Luke chapter 23 verses 35, 37, 39. James also warned the favoritism, James chapter 2 verse 1-4. Proverbs chapter 20 verse 30 NLT says, 30 Physical punishment cleanses away evil, such discipline purifies the heart. Based on the above, evil invites physical punishment. There was no evil in his response to the high priest Annas. Therefore, the strike was unjust. 23. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. 24. 3. Peter's denial. 25:27. CV 25:27. 25 Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." 26 One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" 27 Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. As Jesus foretold, Peter disowned Jesus 3 times. 17, 25, 26. Peter remembered Jesus' word, went outside, broke down and wept bitterly. Matthew chapter 26 verse 75, Mark chapter 14 verse 72, Luke chapter 22 verse 61-62. Maybe Peter could not understand his own behavior, then. He might be shaken by people who belonged to the high priest. However, after his faith had grown and he was filled with the Holy Spirit, one day his message converted 3,000 people to believe in Jesus. Acts chapter 2 verse 41. Peter followed Jesus and glorified God.